How to get more colour from shrubs with attractive foliage. That's the subject of today's video. Hello, I'm David Wilson here at OverDeVest Nurseries on a beautiful spring day. The sun shining, our plants as you see are breaking into growth. There's really a very nice temperature. Yes, there's a lot of activity going on in the nursery here. You're going to hear tractors and vehicles whizzing about as we get ready to send plants out to our partnering garden centres that are located all over our mid-Atlantic and northeastern region. But today what I'm going to do is to show you 4 individual, very good and very different, easy to grow and highly colourful shrubs that are treated in different ways in terms of pruning. So what I'm going to do is to show you each of them, take you through the process that we go through here in pruning and preparing our plants so that hopefully you'll be able to grow them at home in your garden and enjoy them just as much as we do. And the first plant I'm going to tackle is this beautiful little compact growing berberis here. This is Berberis Crimson Cutie. It's part of our worry-free range. And what's fantastic about this is that it has all of the terrific attributes of a berberis in terms of hardiness, reliability, easy to grow, drought tolerance, and very importantly, deer resistant too. All of those. But the big thing with this variety is that this is a non-invasive selection. And that means that we can confidently grow these in our gardens and not have to worry about them seeding into the landscape. We're indebted to Dr. Mark Brand and his team at the University of Connecticut, who probably even now 25 years ago, had the vision of understanding that Berberis thunbergi is going to be an issue here in this region. So he took it upon himself to develop scientific means to develop this beautiful, tight, compact little selection that has all of this lovely purple leaves and, as I mentioned, all of the beautiful things that go with this to be able to grow it right through the whole of the season and never really have to worry about mollycoddling it and just be able to enjoy its nice compact habit and beautiful dark burgundy purple foliage. Now, it is naturally a tight, compact grower, only getting to about 18 inches, possibly about 2 foot high, and spreading out a little wider than that to say about 3.5 foot wide. So it makes this little rounded, kind of pancake shaped plant, but as you see, it's now in early spring producing its purple leaves and also inside here little yellow flowers which do not set seed, and that's the critical thing with this. But as you see also, it's got some tips on here and a little wild growing in terms of its kind of shape. So by taking the pruning shears, or you could use a pair of hand pruners, either, whichever works best for you. I like the shears because it does it a little quicker, but you can use the hand pruners if you want to be a little bit more careful and more exact. But basically, all you need to do now in early spring, just as growth is beginning, is go round and just shape up the plant by cutting back some of those tips of the shoots and making it into, as you see, a nice rounded compact little shrub. One of the things about pruning plants back at this time of year at the start of the season is that providing the roots are well established, in other words that the plant has been in the ground for a little while, once that root system is nicely established, whenever you cut something back, those roots are pumping up the sap to produce the growth, and that makes a lot more growth then on the tip. So when you're pruning, yes, you're shortening back, but you're also in many ways redirecting growth. And so by trimming them back like this, you will make them into extra bushy, compact plants that, as you see then, will make this lovely tight mound and as I mentioned a few minutes ago, have purple foliage that will last all the way from spring through to the autumn time, when incidentally it turns a nice color going into the autumn time too. So that's a little shrub that is great for the fronts of beds and borders, for lining pathways, anywhere where you're looking to create a little pancake of color. Now let me show you this, which is much bigger. This is the purple leaf form of the smoke tree Cotinus, and this particular variety here is one called royal purple. Now this is a plant that you would put towards the back of a bed or a border, somewhere that will make a fantastic backdrop, because this also has really beautiful dark purple leaves. The thing about this variety is that it was developed over 70 years ago by Lombard's nursery in Boskoop, which is the nursery region of the Netherlands. And this particular variety has been around all that time, and one of the great things about it is that it holds its purple color very well through the summertime, even out in bright sunlight. And what's really great about it is that it will grow in almost all types of soils except for wet ones. So as long as the soil is reasonably free draining, it doesn't really matter. This will grow and perform well. Sometimes as a young plant, after you put it in, it will be a little slow to get going, but then as you see from these plants here, once it starts growing, it grows really fast. Now you can go in and you can prune this back to try to make it shorter and bushier, but you'll see that often what happens is that it'll produce these long kind of whippy growths on here, and to my eye, that's not quite as impressive as when you go in and do what I'm going to do now, which is called coppicing. Now, the technique of coppicing something goes back almost as far as history itself. It was used extensively to produce stems for things like thatching and for basket work and for making wattle fences, and was used on a lot of different species, including willows and chestnuts and oaks and so on too. And what the word means is simply to cut a shrub or a tree back to near ground level. And so that's what I'm going to do now using these long handled pruners. It's a matter of just going in and cutting these stems back to about 10 inches or perhaps a foot or so off the ground. The idea is that what you're going to do is to take these back, and that will produce what is known in coppicing words as a stool. Because when you cut that back, and if you look closely here, here's the stem going up with all of this growth that was made last year. I'm going to cut it off here just about 10 inches or a foot above the ground. And if you look closely, you'll see that there's a little bud here. That means that just here there's what they call lignified tissue. That means that with something like this that has a hollow stem, there'll be more wood at that point, and therefore less likely for the joint where you make the cutting joint here, it's not likely to die back quite so much. So with the long handled pruners, you go in just, let me see if I can come in from the side so that you can see better. So if I do this, you should be able to see there that I'm coming in just above the bud and then applying this. So there's the cutting wound there. As you see, there's the hollow stem I was talking about, and here's where the buds are, and these are going to sprout from lower down the stem. That's where the new buds are going to sprout from. Now you'll notice that I'm cutting the thinner stems a little harder and the thicker stems a little less. And when you go in to trim them back like that, that means that you're then going to get growth that will come from each of these points. And when you get into the middle of the plant like I'm doing here now, the idea is to just open it up a little bit. So it's really just a matter then of working your way around the plant, cutting back any of these shoots. The thinner ones are cut back a little bit more severely, the thicker ones not quite so much, but all the time somewhere between possibly 6, 8, 10, 12 inches. Now, as you see, this is a thicker stem here. So if I come around from the side, hopefully you'll be able to see that with these long-handled pruners, you've got good, as Americans saying would go, good leverage. In the UK, I would use the term leverage, but then, as you see, you're able to get in and make that cut. But look what's going on here. You'll see that some shoots are potentially going to be crossing each other, and therefore, what I'm going to do is to come in from behind that and shorten this one back in there, and that now will open that up. And now, because those shoots are thinner, I can easily do that with the hand pruners. So as you see, what I'm going to do is to shorten this one back to this joint here, and then this one here I'm going to shorten back to where these little branches are sprouting here, as you see. So I'm going to take this right back to this point. There's a shoot coming out, there's one there. So I'm going to go in between them and just take that out at that point. And so as I work my way around the plant, you'll see that I'm doing it here again at this shoot just above a bud. Then here's another place where I'm going to take this back to about here, and then on this shoot I'm going to do the same, and that shortened all of this back. There's some little minor branches here, and if you want you can go in and you can just tip those a little bit too to make them bushy. Thin weak stems like this usually tend to make small growth here, which is good because that helps to thicken up the base of the plant. And also just in here are a few little weak stems that I'm going to tidy up as well. Then as I work my way around the plant, you'll see that here is this long shoot here, which I'm going to take right back to this point. And then this is another one that's kind of spreading out here, which I don't really want it to be spreading a lot more. So this time I'm going to take it off close to the ground and just shorten it back there, so that then when it produces growth, it's going to come up in this direction. Now, as you see, it's got a major shoot here coming up through the middle. And if you want, you could probably shorten this back to here or there. But remember that when you shorten it back, it's probably going to make these long kind of growths like this that are a little leggy and so on during the summer. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to take it back to this point here. And because my parrot beak pruners or long handled pruners, as you see, are really nice, strong, I can do it with that, and that means just going in and applying a little bit of muscle and it comes out nice and cleanly. If you're not able to do that, or you don't have this sort of tool, then of course you could go in with a pruning saw and you could make the same sort of cut in here with your pruning saw. But as you see now, I have it all at about the same height with the longer shoots, and now it's really just a matter of going in and tidying up the growth that's here, cutting this back to here, and here again is a joint. So I'm going to trim that back with the hand pruners, just take it back to there. And now this one, as you see, is kind of growing back in towards the middle. So what I'm going to do is to take it back to a joint here. And that means that now, when I take that back, that's going to fill out in the middle. And now here's what we're going to do with this one. Now look, this is a good example of what happened last year. We pruned it back to this point, and then as you see, it produced 3 big strong shoots here. And now what we're going to do is to take it back even a little further to be about the same height as the others. I'm going to come in at about this point. You'll see that there's some joints here. This is where the buds are. So there's plenty of lignified tissue there. I'm going to come in about this point here. And then, as you see, got rid of that stem out of there. And now all we have is this one. And I'm going to do the same with that. And now, as you see, we've created a stool of these shoots that are all going to now sprout from the buds on those stems, and they're going to make strong, luxuriant growth that's going to come up in a columnar shape. It's going to be extra strong and vigorous with big, bold leaves that are going to look very impressive during the summertime. And instead of growing wider and spreading out over the bed, this plant is going to grow up tall with all of that luxuriant growth. Now, if you're somebody who's a little tentative and hasn't done this sort of strong pruning before, I understand. You might have to hold your nose and take a deep breath before you do it, but I promise you, the results are going to be impressive. And maybe during the summertime, we'll come back and we'll do a follow-up video to let you see how this plant turned out. Now, as you probably noticed, that plant had some young growth on it, and ideally, if you're doing it at home, it would probably be better to do it when the plant is totally dormant. It really won't matter. It will soon recover and grow away. And the other thing I should mention about the smoke bush and trimming it that way too is that yes, it will make luxuriant foliage, but because the silky flower plumes, of which is why it's called the smoke bush, is carried on older shoots and older wood, it won't have any of those fluffy flowers. So if you're looking for foliage, then that's definitely the way to go. If on the other hand you want the plumes of little smoky flowers that comes off the tops of the plants, then that's not going to happen if you do prune it back. Now here in this part of our display garden is another plant that has very attractive foliage on it that's really tough and hardy and easy to grow. This is Villa Cool Splash from First Editions, a really good workhorse shrub for a variety of reasons. First of all, it's very hardy and tough and accommodating, will grow in either sun or partially shaded sites, has little yellow, sulfury yellow flowers during the summertime, but this one is really grown for its variegated foliage that's very impressive from the time it breaks its bud right through the summertime and into the fall. And I like it because of the white color. It means that you can blend things that have, say, yellow right next to pink flowering things and they won't clash, because white, of course, is a neutral color. But if you look closely at the tops of these plants, you'll see that during the winter time they have died back a little bit. They're sprouting away really strongly here at the middle and base of the plant, but the tips are just a little unsightly. So if you want, you can take a pair of hedging shears and you can just go in, if you're somebody who is a little tentative about pruning and you don't really want to be as aggressive as I was a few minutes ago, you can just go in and you can tidy up the tips of the plants like I'm doing now by removing these dead shoots. That'll work fine, because in another few weeks all of these shoots will sprout out and they'll grow past all of these joints, and so the plant will be rounded, it'll be beautiful, and it'll be very attractive. And that's one of the great things about it. You can literally go in as hard as you like and you can take a lot of the older shoots out of the inside of it to encourage young fresh growth that's going to be coming up from the center of the plant, particularly if you have an older plant that you want to try to regenerate. You can go in, as I'm doing here now with the pruning shears, and cutting back these stems, and I'm probably taking roughly a third or so off the top of the plant. That is going to then reinvigorate the whole plant. If there's any dead shoots like this one, see this shoot here, there's no leaves on it, that's one that you can really take quite hard back and take all of that out there. And the more, because you're doing pruning, and remember I was talking earlier and saying about when you prune something, the roots are still pumping up the sap from underneath, so it's going to come back even stronger. I know it seems like a kind of contradiction because you've got these precious plants and you don't really want to be cutting them back, but actually by pruning things back like this, you're encouraging stronger replenished growth, and that's why it's good to really go in and trim them hard back like I'm doing here now, and then that will reinvigorate the plant, as well as it making it a little bit more shorter and compact. So let me show you exactly what I'm doing when I'm going into it. Here's a dead piece here, for instance. If we can get you to zoom in on this, you'll see what I'm going to do with this piece. So if you look back in here, if I spread these branches out like this, I'll set my pruners down there so that you can see. You see how this whole stem here is, for some reason, this is dead, but look at all these young shoots that are coming on the stems here. So with the pruners, you can reach in, and that's probably the first thing to do, is to go in and take out any dead shoots. And as you look at this one, you'll see that it's as dead as a dodo, so that comes out. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to shorten this bush back by cutting it back to a bud joint. If you look here at this stem, you'll see how it's got some nice strong buds here, and so that's where I'm going to trim this back like that. And now look, these young shoots are going to grow out, and that's where all that vigorous growth is going to come from. Going to do the same with this stem, and now as you see, I'm starting to get all the plant trimmed back. This opens up the center of the plant. It means that all of these shoots are now going to simultaneously all start growing, and in a few weeks' time this will be a very vigorous, healthy bush again with lots of very attractive foliage. There's an interesting thing about this plant that I find really quite fascinating. You see, this is a variety that was developed at Cornell, at the Landscape Plant Development Center there by Peter Poderis. And what's interesting is that he had sown hundreds, if not thousands, of seedlings of the native species. And one day, when he was looking over his seedlings, he noticed that one of the seedlings had a little minute speck of variegation on it. He grew it out, he trimmed off all the green, just left the variegated foliage, and it's from that tiny little white speck of variegation that today there's probably thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of this variety grown all over the world. Really fantastic how somebody had the knowledge and really the determination to get through and develop it. And now, because of that, we've got a tough, hardy, reliable, beautiful foliage shrub that you can't go wrong with, and I know you're going to be able to enjoy in your garden. So there, as you see, I've taken the whole plant back by probably about half. I said originally a third, but actually when I got into it, I found a lot more dead material in the inside of it than I was anticipating. So I cleaned that, or at least most of it, out. And now, as you see by the size of the pile of the clippings here, I've removed a good deal, and it's going to mean that all of these shoots that are left here are all going to sprout simultaneously. It's going to produce strong, vigorous growth with lots of foliage on it. This is Villa Cool Splash. And the last plant I'm going to show you how to prune and focus on today is this. A very beautiful little silver-leafed willow. This is a variety also from First Editions. This is a little willow called Iceberg Alley. And as you see, it only grows about 3 foot or so high. Might in time get up to about 4 or 5 foot high. I love this because it has this very bright silvery foliage that also is really good to have in the garden, because silvery foliage is just great for being as a neutral plant too. It's the same sort of thing. You could take bright, glaring, garish colored plants and put them side by side. They fight like heck in terms of color clashes, but when you put in a silvery plant between them, then that just softens and neutralizes down that color, and so it's very valuable to have silver in the garden. Lots of silvery plants, and I use a lot of them in my own garden, but I'm very fond of this because it's a willow, it's salix, it's tough, it's hardy, it's reliable. Hardy, this is a zone 2 plant. This comes from way up in Labrador and Newfoundland. It's a variety that was selected by Todd Boland at the Memorial University in Newfoundland. He's a research horticulturalist there. He's an avid photographer and birder too, and very interested in all sorts of native things. And it was him that spotted this plant and made it available. And we've been growing it here in the nursery and offering it through our partnering garden centers now for several years. And I just love it because it's so tough and hardy and silvery leaves, but also it's another plant that you can't go wrong with because it will grow in all types of soil, including wet, soggy sites, and not everything will do in that sort of situation. And I really love the fact that you're able to encourage this to make even more luxuriant growth. And kind of like we were doing with the smoke bush in going in and coppicing the plants, we can do this too with this plant, but of course on a much smaller scale. Now, it's a willow, so that means it will carry catkins. And as you see, they're very pretty. They come out first with these red little stamens on here, and then as they mature, they go through to this bright, furry, silvery color. And what's very important about them is that pollinating insects, bees and so on, just love to come and visit them. So as you see, what I'm doing now is this plant, a bit like the smoke bush, has already started into growth because I'm leaving these catkins to mature so that the pollinators are able to get in them. But in another week or 10 days, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to remove all of these shoots so that then it will grow out and produce lots of silvery growth. So now, as you see, I've taken back all of the old branches that were here, pruned them right down to about 2 or 3 inches off the ground. All of these will now start to grow and produce again lots of luxuriant growth that's then going to make this bed even more impressive. You probably notice that I've left a few stems that still have a decent amount of catkins on them for the pollinators, but most of the rest of these have now finished, so it's safe to go in and prune them now at this point in springtime. In fact, if you wanted to, you could really leave this and prune them later on too. As I say, because it's a willow, it's so tough and hardy and reliable and easy to grow that really you don't have to be very fussy with it at all. And now the last thing I'm going to do with each of these 4 varieties of shrubs is to put down a little bit of a slow release fertilizer. This, as you see, is a granular material. I'm just sprinkling about a handful or so to the square yard. This is not really totally necessary, but what this is going to do is that it will slowly release nitrogen, phosphate and potash. It will release it over a long period, little by little, and that will be there for when these roots all start growing and putting out the new growth. I'm going to do this with this plant and then each of the other 3 that I've done previously. So I hope now that you've seen some of my tips and suggestions that you'll be able to get even more colour and enjoyment out of growing some of your attractively foliaged shrubs too. This is David Wilson. Enjoy your gardening. It's good for us and it's very good for our environment as well.